It was an ordinary evening, the kind of night where the world feels calm and still. The sky was fading into twilight, and the streets were quieter than usual. The man walked with his hands in his pockets, the cool breeze against his face offering a brief moment of peace after a long, exhausting day. He had no intention of running into trouble tonight. Life had taught him that trouble usually found you when you least expected it. But as he walked down the sidewalk, unaware of the chaos about to unfold, he could feel the unease creeping up his spine. Then, out of nowhere, the roar of motorcycle engines shattered the stillness. He glanced up, a quick flicker of concern in his eyes. A pack of bikers appeared in his peripheral vision, cutting through the quiet night like wolves on the hunt. Their motorcycles revved as they sped down the road, the sound echoing against the buildings, a reminder of the force of their presence. The man didn't move. He didn't speed up, didn't slow down. He kept walking, steady and calm. But in the pit of his stomach, something stirred. It wasn't fear, not yet. Just a deep, instinctive sense of something about to go terribly wrong. As the bikers approached, they slowed down, their engines growling like they were stalking their prey. He could see them now. The group was at least 6 strong, their heavy jackets adorned with patches that marked them as part of something larger, something dangerous. The leader, a burly man with a scar running down the left side of his face, was in the front. He wore a look of disdain, as if he already knew what he was about to do. The other bikers followed close behind, their eyes scanning the street, always on the lookout for a target. And that's when their eyes met. The man didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Something inside of him told him to stay calm. To stay focused. His years of training, the moments he'd spent in some of the world's most dangerous situations, all came rushing back. The fight wasn't just physical, it was mental. The key was always to control the situation before it controlled you. The group stopped about 10 feet away, blocking the sidewalk in front of him. The man could smell the oil from the motorcycles and the faint trace of alcohol on the bikers' breaths. The leader's voice broke through the tension. "Get off the sidewalk, you don't belong here," he said, his voice dripping with venom. His words weren't just an order, they were a declaration of dominance. He was trying to provoke fear, to get the man to back down. But the man didn't budge. The leader sneered, motioning to the others behind him. One by one, the bikers dismounted, their boots hitting the concrete with a thud. They formed a semicircle around him, and the air grew thick with hostility. The man's mind raced. He knew what was coming. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered aggression. But there was something about these men, something about their energy, that felt different. It wasn't just hatred, it was an intention to make a statement. "Don't you know who we are?" The leader stepped closer, his hand resting on the chain hanging from his belt. The man could feel the weight of the words, could see the challenge in the leader's eyes. The man said nothing. He stood tall, his posture relaxed but alert, as if he were just another person walking down the street. But inside, his heart was pounding. His hands remained in his pockets, though the fingers of his right hand were twitching, moving ever so slightly, like they were preparing to act. The first biker to move was a younger one, his face covered by a bandana, his eyes wild with excitement. Without warning, he lunged forward, aiming a punch at the man's face. It all happened in a flash. The man's left hand shot out, grabbing the biker's wrist before the fist could land. In one fluid motion, he twisted the wrist, forcing the biker to the ground with a loud grunt of pain. The others froze for a moment. They hadn't expected that kind of response. They'd been expecting a victim. Instead, they had a fighter. "What the hell?" one of the bikers muttered, his eyes wide with disbelief. The leader stepped forward again, his eyes narrowing. "Get him." The chaos that followed was a blur of movement and sound. 2 bikers rushed in from either side, swinging chains, aiming to trap the man in a vise of metal. But the man was already moving. His body, honed from years of military training, reacted before his mind had time to think. He ducked under one of the chains, spinning around to avoid a wild swing from another. With a precise movement, he swept the leg of the biker closest to him, sending him crashing to the ground. The fight wasn't even. He was faster. Smarter. Every movement was calculated, designed to incapacitate, not to kill. He wasn't fighting to hurt them, he was fighting to survive. But as the bikers recovered and tried again, their eyes began to shift. What they thought was a random man, someone they could intimidate or overpower, was something entirely different. They hadn't expected resistance, let alone skill. The leader's eyes darted from one biker to another, his confidence slowly beginning to crack. And then, in a heartbeat, everything changed. The leader took another step forward, this time pulling a knife from his belt. His eyes glinted with a dangerous, cocky smile. "You're done now." The man saw it coming. He stepped aside as the blade swiped past him, narrowly missing his skin. He grabbed the leader's wrist, twisting it with the same precision he had used on the first biker. The knife fell to the ground with a clatter. "You're not dealing with someone you can push around," the man said, his voice low, filled with authority. He pushed the leader backward, sending him stumbling into one of his men. A few of the bikers hesitated now, their eyes no longer filled with rage but fear. They didn't know what to do. This man wasn't just some random person. There was something different about him. Something they couldn't quite place. The man stood tall, looking down at the group of bikers. They were beginning to realize the mistake they'd made. But it was too late. "Walk away," the man said, his voice calm, almost serene. "Before this gets worse." For a moment, everything seemed still. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. The leader, still recovering from his fall, was clearly weighing his options. But he saw something in the man's eyes, something that made him reconsider. The realization dawned on him. They weren't just facing a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were facing a soldier. A trained killer who had seen things they couldn't even begin to comprehend. One by one, the bikers backed off, mounting their motorcycles in silence. No more words were exchanged. The roar of the engines filled the air once again, but this time it sounded different, more like a retreat than an attack. The man stood there, watching them disappear into the night. His heart slowed, his breathing steadying. The adrenaline of the fight began to fade, replaced by the familiar calm of someone who had been here before. As the last of the bikers vanished into the distance, the man exhaled, his mind racing with the weight of what had just happened. It had started as another night. Another walk. Another quiet moment. But it had ended in something else entirely. Something that had only just begun. What would happen when they found out who he really was? What would happen when the truth came out? The man stood in the silence of the street, his breath steadying, his mind racing. The bikers were gone now, their motorcycles disappearing into the distance like shadows fading with the night. But the encounter left a weight behind, an eerie calm that didn't feel quite right. Something was brewing, he could feel it in the air. The stillness after the storm was often more dangerous than the chaos itself. He took a deep breath and turned around, walking in the opposite direction. His body was tense, his instincts sharp. Despite the fight being over, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't quite done with these men. Something told him this wasn't just a random encounter. It never was. Not in his line of work. His thoughts drifted back to the few moments of the fight that were still fresh in his mind. The bikers' eyes, shocked, confused, when they realized they weren't facing a victim. The leader's hesitation, the brief but noticeable shift in the man's posture when he saw the knife coming. He had acted without thinking, almost like it was second nature. His military training had taken over, and that was what saved him. But there was something else, something he wasn't ready to confront. The fact that he had fought back so efficiently. He had fought back because he was trained to fight, but it wasn't just training. He had wanted to fight, needed to. The adrenaline, the rush, it was familiar. Too familiar. And that scared him. It scared him more than the bikers had. As he walked, his mind continued to race. He tried to push the thoughts aside, to focus on getting home. But it was no use. He could feel something following him. The weight of his past. It was always there, lurking beneath the surface. He had spent years burying it, trying to escape it. But the past had a way of catching up with him. And tonight, it had caught up with him faster than he was ready for. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. The message was from an unknown number, but he didn't need to see the name to know who it was. He'd been expecting this. It read, "You're still in danger. They're looking for you. Don't trust anyone." The message sent a chill down his spine. He had known it was only a matter of time before they came looking for him, but hearing it so plainly, so bluntly, it was different. It was real. He didn't reply. Instead, he turned his phone off and slipped it back into his pocket. His instincts told him to be cautious, to avoid any direct contact. Whoever had sent the message might be trying to help, but then again, they might have their own reasons for reaching out. He couldn't trust anyone anymore. Not after everything. But that didn't mean he was going to stop running. Running was all he had ever done. From the past, from the danger, from the shadows that had followed him for far too long. As he walked down the street, he passed a small alleyway. He glanced down it quickly, his eyes sharp. Nothing. But his gut told him otherwise. He stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. A sound. A faint sound. A motorcycle engine. He spun around, scanning the street. The sound grew louder, closer. He didn't need to look twice to know what it was. The bikers had returned. His hand instinctively moved toward the inside of his jacket, where a hidden knife rested against his side. But then, just as quickly, he stopped himself. This wasn't the time for a confrontation. He needed to stay in control, to make sure he wasn't drawn into a trap. His eyes darted across the street. There was a small shop to his left, its lights dim. A small convenience store with a narrow entrance. Without thinking, he walked toward it. He stepped inside, the cool air of the store brushing against his skin. The bell above the door chimed softly, and the shopkeeper, an older man with glasses, perched on the edge of his nose, looked up. He smiled faintly but didn't say anything. The man walked to the back of the store, pretending to browse through the shelves, but his mind was elsewhere. He could hear the engines now, getting closer. It wouldn't be long before the bikers reached the intersection. He needed to make a decision, and fast. His heart raced as he walked past the shelves, his thoughts spinning. He knew he couldn't just keep running. The bikers were a symptom, not the cause. Someone had sent them after him. Someone had orchestrated this. He had to know who. He had to know why. The only way to find out was to face the truth. He glanced at his reflection in the dusty mirror on the far wall. His face was still bruised from the earlier encounter, his jaw stiff from the tension. He looked like a man who had seen too much, been through too much. And he had. But there was something deeper, something about him that most people didn't see. Beneath the exterior of an ordinary man was a person who had been trained to survive in ways most people could never imagine. The man's phone buzzed again, but this time, he didn't bother to check it. He knew what it would say, more warnings, more cryptic messages that only raised more questions. He didn't need them anymore. He had to take action. The time for waiting was over. He stepped back out of the store and made his way down the side street. The sound of motorcycles still lingered, the engines rumbling like distant thunder. He wasn't sure how far behind them they were, but he knew it didn't matter. What mattered now was staying ahead of the game, not getting caught in the web they were trying to weave around him. As he turned a corner, he spotted a small alleyway to his right. It was dark, narrow, and seemed to lead nowhere. Perfect. He darted down it, moving quickly but quietly. His footsteps echoed in the stillness as he rounded a corner, coming up behind an old building. He pressed his back against the cool brick, breathing shallowly, listening. The sound of the motorcycles grew louder, closer. His heart skipped a beat as he heard them slow down. They were right there, just a few steps away. He crouched down, hiding in the shadows, his body tense, every muscle ready to spring into action at the slightest sound. He could feel the vibrations of the engines beneath his feet. They were close now. Too close. A few seconds passed, then a few more. The world around him seemed to hold its breath, and he held his own. And then, the motorcycles passed. The rumble of the engines faded, and the street became still again. The bikers had moved on. For a moment, he stayed crouched in the alley, his breath coming in short gasps. He didn't move until he was sure they were gone. Finally, he stood up slowly, his legs stiff from crouching. The danger had passed, but the sense of urgency hadn't left. He couldn't keep running forever. The question now wasn't whether they would come after him again, it was who they were working for. Who was behind this? The man leaned against the cold brick wall, his breath shallow and fast, though his body had fallen into the quiet rhythm of survival. The alley was dark, the faint light from street lamps casting long, eerie shadows that flickered across the ground. He still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a weight in the air that he couldn't quite place, but it clung to him, heavy and suffocating. The bikes had passed, but he wasn't fooled. The danger wasn't over. It never was. In his line of work, survival depended on one thing, never being complacent. It wasn't enough to survive the attack. It wasn't enough to escape. It wasn't enough to simply stay alive. He needed to know why they were after him. He needed to understand what had triggered this sudden assault. It wasn't random. Nothing in his life ever was. Everything had a purpose, a reason, even if it was buried under layers of secrets and lies. But right now, his only focus was getting away, staying hidden, staying off the radar. The shadows had become his closest ally. His military training had never been about making noise or leaving a trail, it had always been about remaining invisible, unpredictable, blending into the world until it was time to strike. And right now, he was waiting. Waiting for a moment of clarity. The cool night air stung his face as he turned and stepped deeper into the alley, his movements deliberate and precise. His hands remained clenched at his sides, ready for anything. He knew he couldn't linger for long. The longer he stayed in one place, the more dangerous it became. He needed to move. The fear wasn't the threat, it was the knowledge that he could be trapped at any moment. The feeling that someone, something, was watching him. A sudden noise broke his thoughts. It was faint, barely audible. The sound of a footstep, followed by another. He froze, his heart racing. His first instinct was to reach for his knife, but he stopped himself. No. This wasn't the time for a fight. He didn't know who was out there, and right now, his priority was escape. His eyes scanned the alley, searching the darkness for movement. His senses were on high alert, his training kicking in. He knew how to listen for the subtle sounds that most people missed, the rustling of fabric, the shift in the air when someone was nearby. Nothing. The sound had stopped. But he could still feel it, something was out there, something he couldn't quite see. His fingers brushed the grip of the knife once again, and this time, he didn't stop himself. His body was prepared to move, to fight, to do whatever it took to stay alive. But before he could make a decision, the silence shattered once more. A voice. A woman's voice. "Are you alone?" The question came from behind him, soft but clear. The man's body stiffened, his mind racing. The voice was unfamiliar, but there was something in it that struck a chord deep within him. It was calm, confident. Almost too calm for someone who was speaking in the dark of a city alley. He didn't respond immediately, his instincts telling him to remain still. 1,000 thoughts ran through his mind. Was this another trap? Was she part of the bikers? Or was she something else entirely? His muscles tensed, ready to spring into action, but he held back. For now, he needed to gather information. A confrontation, if it came, would be on his terms. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the woman standing a few feet away. She was tall, dressed in dark clothing that blended into the shadows. Her face was partially obscured by the hood of her jacket, but her eyes, sharp, calculating, shone brightly in the dim light. "I'm not here to fight," she said, as though reading his mind. "But you should know, you're not as invisible as you think." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind raced. How did she know that? How could she possibly know what he had been thinking? His gaze narrowed further, suspicion creeping into his thoughts. There was no way she could have been following him for long, no one could track him that quickly. But she seemed too calm for this to be a random encounter. He stepped back, his body poised to move at a moment's notice. "Who are you?" His voice was steady, despite the tension building in his chest. "What do you want?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She simply took a step forward, closer to him, her movements measured and controlled. The air between them felt thick, charged with a dangerous energy. She was unafraid, and that only made him more cautious. "I know what they're after," she said quietly. "And I know why you're running. But it's not just them you need to worry about." The words hung in the air like a warning. He didn't speak at first, digesting her statement. His mind raced. Who was she working for? How did she know so much about him? "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral, to mask the storm of thoughts raging inside his head. She didn't seem convinced. She raised her hand slightly, as if to calm him down. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to help. You've made enemies, but they're not the only ones looking for you." The man's heart skipped a beat. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, suddenly felt even more real. He had thought the bikers were the worst of it, but now it seemed there were others involved. Others who had been keeping tabs on him, waiting for the right moment to strike. "I don't need help," he said firmly, his tone colder than he meant it to be. "I can handle myself." The woman's eyes softened, but only for a moment. She took another step closer. "That's the problem. You think you're the only one who can survive this. But you're not. They know about your past. They know exactly who you are." At those words, the man's blood ran cold. His past. The one he had buried so deeply. The one he had spent years trying to outrun. His military background. His time as a Navy SEAL. She had said it so casually, like it was something everyone knew. His instinct was to deny it, to lie, to cover up the truth. But something in her eyes told him that lying wouldn't help. She already knew more than he was comfortable with. "How do you know that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't want to hear the answer, but the question slipped out before he could stop it. She met his gaze with an unflinching stare. "I know because I've been tracking you. Ever since the first attack. I know who you are, and I know what you've done. And now they're coming for you. Not just the bikers, but someone much more dangerous." The words hit him like a freight train. His mind scrambled to keep up, to make sense of the chaos unfolding around him. His past, the one he had worked so hard to forget, was catching up with him. And this woman, whoever she was, seemed to know more about him than anyone had a right to. Before he could ask any more questions, her expression shifted. A sudden urgency flickered in her eyes, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "They're here," she said, barely audible. The man's heart raced as he turned his head sharply toward the street. The sound of motorcycles, unmistakable and deafening, grew louder in the distance. The bikers. They had returned. But this time, they weren't alone. The roar of the engines reverberated through the alley like thunder, sending tremors through the man's body. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get as far away as possible. But the woman's warning echoed in his mind, "They're here." The motorcycles were getting closer, and the last thing he wanted was to be caught in the open. The alley offered no real cover, but the shadows, he could still use the shadows. He glanced at the woman, whose calm demeanor remained unwavering despite the approaching threat. "Get down," she whispered sharply, moving towards the far end of the alley where a narrow door stood ajar. The dim light from inside barely reached the street, but it offered a potential escape. She wasn't waiting for him to decide. Without a second thought, she slipped inside, vanishing into the darkness. His mind raced. He knew he had two choices: follow her or stay in the open, where the bikers could easily spot him. His gut told him that whatever this woman knew, she might be his best chance at surviving whatever was coming. He followed her into the door. The sound of the engines grew louder, the roar vibrating against his chest. He could feel the heat of the threat approaching. His heart was pounding in his ears as he slipped into the dark room, pulling the door gently behind him. Inside, the air was cool and musty, and the dim light barely illuminated the room. But it was safe, for now. The woman was already crouched in the corner, her figure barely visible in the gloom. She motioned for him to stay quiet. The man's breathing slowed as he instinctively moved toward her, every muscle in his body alert to the slightest sound. She didn't speak as they both huddled in the darkness. But there was something in the air, an awareness that they weren't alone, not just in the room, but in the world outside, too. The sound of the motorcycles reached a crescendo before abruptly cutting off. The man's heart skipped a beat. They were here. Right outside. But he didn't hear the screech of tires, or the revving of engines in the way he had expected. It was eerily silent. Seconds passed, then minutes. The man's mind raced. What was going on? Why had the bikers stopped? He couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse than a gang of troublemakers was closing in on him. The woman remained still, her eyes scanning the darkness outside the building. She was waiting, watching for any signs of movement. Suddenly, the door creaked. The man's breath caught in his throat, his muscles tense. A shadow passed by the thin gap between the door and the frame, and the man held his breath. The footsteps grew louder, but then, without warning, they stopped. A figure stood just outside, breathing steadily. His presence was unnerving. The man couldn't see his face, but he could tell the person was large, imposing, someone who didn't belong in this quiet, run-down part of the city. "I know you're in there," the voice rumbled, deep and threatening. The woman tensed but didn't move. She didn't respond, didn't even flinch. The man's mind raced. Was this someone else hunting him? Or was it someone she knew? He didn't dare speak, afraid that even the smallest sound might give them away. The man's thoughts swirled in confusion. He could feel the weight of the danger pressing in on him, but he had no clear idea who the enemy was now. First, it was the bikers. Then, this mysterious woman. And now, another figure in the darkness. Was there a greater force at play? A conspiracy he couldn't see? He tried to piece everything together, but there was too much unknown, too many moving parts. Suddenly, the voice spoke again, closer now. "You can't outrun this. You can't hide. They'll find you." The man's pulse quickened. Whoever this was, they weren't just after him for the sake of it. He had been part of something bigger, something that was pulling all these forces together. But what was it? And who were these people? The woman didn't flinch, but the man could see her eyes narrowing in the darkness, the faintest hint of recognition in them. Whoever was outside, she knew them. She knew this game, and she knew the stakes. But why wasn't she helping him? Why hadn't she offered him answers? There was no time for these questions. The man's instincts kicked in once again. He needed to act. The danger outside wasn't just real, it was now close enough to touch. He glanced at the woman, her eyes fixed on the door. He knew he had to trust her, but how much of what she was saying was the truth? Could he afford to trust anyone right now? The silence outside was thick, oppressive. Every second felt like a year. Then, the woman made her move. She stood slowly, without a sound, and approached the door. "Get ready," she whispered. Her voice was calm, but it held an edge of urgency. Before he could respond, she reached for the door handle, and with one swift motion, she yanked it open. The man's heart nearly stopped. There, standing in front of them, was the figure from earlier, the large shadow in the alley. But something was different now. The man could see his face, illuminated by the weak light from inside the building. It was a man with cold, calculating eyes, a predator. His face was scarred, rough, and he wore a leather jacket that seemed to be custom-made. He looked like someone who had been in far too many fights, someone who wasn't afraid of getting his hands dirty. And yet, the most disturbing thing about him was the way he looked at the woman. It was a look of recognition. A look of something more than familiarity. "I should have known it was you," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Always hiding in the shadows. You never change." The woman didn't flinch. "I could say the same about you," she replied, her tone as icy as his. The man stared at the two of them. He didn't know whether to jump in and intervene or stay quiet. His heart pounded in his chest, but his training took over. The questions he had about who this man was, and what he wanted, would have to wait. He needed to stay alive first. "Who the hell are you?" the man asked, his voice low but controlled. The large man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes never leaving the woman's face. The air seemed to crackle with tension. There was a history here, something deep and dark that neither of them was willing to discuss openly. It was clear that this man knew the woman intimately. Too intimately. But before the tension could snap into violence, the woman spoke again. "He's not who you think he is," she said, her voice carrying an edge of authority. "He's part of a much bigger game, and you're in the middle of it now." The words hit him like a slap to the face. Part of a game? What did she mean? Who were these people? The man's head was spinning. He had always known his past was more complicated than he let on, but this? This was something he hadn't prepared for. The large man took another step forward, his smile cold and predatory. "You think you can run from this? You're just a small piece in a bigger puzzle. You don't even know who's really pulling the strings." The woman's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "I'll figure it out before you do." The man knew then that this was no longer just about survival. It was about something far bigger than him. And if he wanted to live, he would have to understand what this game was, who these people were, and what it all meant for his life. The air in the room was thick with tension. The man could feel the weight of his heart in his chest, pounding like a drumbeat. He could hardly keep up with everything that had happened in the past few days. First, the bikers. Then the mysterious woman. And now this man, the one who seemed to know more than he was letting on. Who's behind this? The man's voice cracked, the rawness of his fear finally breaking through. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle that had been unfolding around him, but it felt impossible. Every time he thought he had a handle on the situation, something new would surface. The large man standing in the doorway didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes narrowed, studying the man like a predator sizing up its prey. He took a slow step into the room, his boots scraping against the floor as if he owned every inch of it. There was a cold, almost chilling confidence about him, and it made the man's skin crawl. "You want answers," the man finally said, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm not the one who can give them to you. You're way over your head." The woman in the corner stirred, her face unreadable. She had been silent for far too long, and the man could sense the storm brewing in her. It was as if she was deciding whether to reveal something to him, or whether she would leave him in the dark. "I'm not here to play games," the man said, forcing his voice to stay steady despite the fear rising within him. "I just want to know what's going on. What's your role in all of this?" The large man didn't flinch at the question. Instead, he smiled, a tight, dangerous grin that made the man's stomach turn. "My role?" he repeated. "You're asking the wrong question. The real question is, who's pulling the strings?" The words landed like a bomb. Who's pulling the strings? The man's thoughts scattered. There was something bigger going on here, something he couldn't even begin to understand. This wasn't just about him. It was about something far more complicated, and the more he tried to dig into it, the deeper he was sinking into a web of lies and manipulation. The woman's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something, vulnerability. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the same cool, calculated expression she had worn since they'd met. But it was enough to make him wonder. What was she hiding? And why did she seem to know so much about all of this? "Enough of this," the large man snapped, cutting through the silence. "We don't have time for games. The people behind this, people you don't even know, are closing in. You think this is just about bikers or some random attack? Think again." The man's blood ran cold. His pulse quickened. His mind was struggling to process everything, but the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Whoever was behind this wasn't some petty criminals or disjointed thugs, they were organized. They were dangerous. And they had their sights set on him. "Why me?" the man finally asked, his voice quieter now. "Why have I been dragged into this?" The large man looked at him for a long moment, his gaze intense and calculating. He seemed to weigh the decision, as if considering whether or not to reveal more. "Because," the man said slowly, almost as if speaking to himself, "you're part of something bigger. A project. A legacy." He paused, his eyes flicking to the woman in the corner. "And so is she." The woman's face didn't change, but the tension in the room was palpable. The man couldn't read her, but he could feel the undercurrent of emotion beneath her calm exterior. There was history between her and the large man. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was important. And it was clear that this project he spoke of had something to do with it. The large man continued, his voice a dangerous whisper. "You both were part of a test that went wrong. And now, they're coming for you. They'll stop at nothing to finish what they started." The words hit him like a punch. Test? What kind of test? He had never agreed to anything like that. He hadn't even known there was something to agree to. His mind was reeling. "You're telling me I was part of some experiment?" the man asked, his voice tight with disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." The large man stepped closer, his shadow looming over the man. "I'm not kidding. They've been watching you, watching both of you, for a long time. And now, the time has come to finish what they started." The woman finally spoke, her voice cold and distant. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." The man's heart was racing. He had known there was something more to all of this. He hadn't imagined it, not completely. But this? This was far beyond anything he had expected. "I didn't ask for any of this," he snapped, his anger flaring. "I don't even know who you people are. You think you can just drag me into whatever this is and expect me to play along? No way." The large man smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent chills down the man's spine. "You don't get to choose anymore. You're already in it. And you don't get out." The woman moved then, her eyes flashing with something that could only be described as regret. She stepped forward, her hand resting briefly on the man's arm. "Listen to him," she said softly. "You're part of something much bigger than you can even comprehend. And if you want to survive, you have to trust me." The man stared at her. The last few days had been a blur of confusion and danger, but now, as he looked at her, he realized that she might be the only person who could help him understand what was going on. He had no other choice. "I'm listening," he said, his voice steady, though his mind was anything but. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to reveal. "The test we were part of, what they were trying to do, it wasn't just about making soldiers or creating some kind of superhuman. They were trying to unlock something deeper. Something that could change the world." The man's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the large man for a moment before she continued. "They were trying to unlock potential. But they didn't care who they hurt in the process. They didn't care about the people they used, the lives they destroyed. You and I, we were just pawns in their game." The man's mind was spinning. The idea that he had been used, manipulated, his whole life turned into something of an experiment, was almost too much to process. But the more he thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. "So, you're saying that they're coming after us because of this project, whatever it was?" the man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman nodded grimly. "Yes. And they're not just coming for us. They're coming for anyone who knows too much. They'll stop at nothing to silence us." A heavy silence fell over the room. The man could feel the weight of their words pressing down on him. Whoever they weren't just trying to kill them. They wanted to erase everything, destroy the truth, bury the past. "What do we do now?" the man asked, his voice low, filled with dread. "We fight," the woman said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We survive. We uncover the truth before they get to us." The large man stepped forward, his shadow swallowing the room. "And we make sure they never get what they want." Cliffhanger, the revelation of the project changes everything for the man. Now, he must decide whether to trust the woman and fight back or walk away and face an unknown fate. Who is behind the project? What is the truth? And can they stop it before it's too late? The sun had set hours ago, leaving the world around them bathed in darkness. A quiet stillness hung in the air, only broken by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards beneath their feet. The man's heart was pounding, each beat a reminder of the weight of the decision that lay ahead. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about uncovering the truth and taking a stand against those who had pulled the strings for so long. The room was small, dimly lit by a single hanging bulb that swayed slightly with the draft. The woman was seated across from him, her face a mask of determination, though the fear in her eyes was undeniable. The large man, who had been their reluctant guide, stood near the door, arms crossed, his presence almost suffocating. His silence was deafening, as though he was waiting for something, perhaps for the man to make his choice. "You said we fight," the man finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the question. "How do we fight something we don't even understand?" The woman looked up at him, her expression softening just for a moment. She understood his doubt, she shared it. But there was no time for hesitation anymore. She had seen enough to know that what they were facing wasn't just some twisted experiment gone wrong. It was a force, a powerful, shadowy organization that would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. "We fight by exposing them," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "We gather everything we can, every piece of evidence, and we go public. The world needs to know what they've been doing." The man's eyes narrowed. "And what if they come after us before we can do that?" The large man, who had remained silent up until now, stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "They'll come after you, all right. But you've already got the upper hand. They think you're just some average guy caught up in something bigger than you can handle. But they don't know you. They don't know what you're capable of." His words hit the man harder than he expected. There was truth to what he said. After everything that had happened, the attack by the bikers, the close calls, the endless games being played with his life, he had changed. The man who had walked into this mess was no longer the same. He had been tested, pushed to his limits, and now he understood. He understood that survival wasn't just about evading the enemy, it was about becoming the weapon they never saw coming. "I'm not the person I was when this all started," the man muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. The woman's gaze softened. "None of us are." There was a heavy silence as the man processed her words. They were right. The past days, weeks even, had been nothing short of a crash course in survival, in trusting strangers, in uncovering a conspiracy that reached further than anyone could have imagined. But now it was time to act. It was time to end it. "We can't do this alone," the man said, his voice low but resolute. "We need to contact people who can help, those who will believe us." The large man shook his head slowly. "No. If you contact anyone, it's over. They'll shut it all down before you can even blink. We need to take matters into our own hands. Get the evidence. Expose them ourselves." The woman nodded, and for the first time, she seemed truly in agreement with him. "He's right. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets. We've already been marked. If we don't act now, they'll make sure we never get the chance." The man stood up, his legs stiff from sitting too long, and looked out the small window that overlooked the quiet street below. He could see the faint glow of streetlights and the occasional car passing by, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Nothing at all. It was hard to believe that just a few feet away, a storm was brewing, one that could tear apart everything they knew. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. If he took action, he was committing to a war. If he didn't, then he would be a pawn forever, a tool for someone else's game. He couldn't go back to the life he had before, the quiet existence of normalcy that had been shattered by these forces. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. "We'll do it," the man said firmly, turning back to face the woman and the large man. "But we need to make sure we're not walking into a trap. We need to be smart." The large man cracked a grin, though it was grim, devoid of any real humor. "You're finally thinking like one of us." The woman stood as well, her posture tense, alert. "We can't waste any more time. We've got a window of opportunity right now, but it's closing fast. We make our move, and we make it count." The man looked at her, his mind racing. He didn't know what would happen after this. He didn't know if they would succeed or fail. But one thing was certain, he was in this now. And he wouldn't let them win. "Let's do this," the man said, his voice filled with determination. Hours later, they found themselves outside a small, inconspicuous building on the outskirts of town. It looked like any other office building, bland and featureless, but they knew better. This was where the heart of the operation was located, the place where the project had been born. The place that held the answers they were desperate to uncover. The three of them stood in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to make their move. The man's heart was hammering in his chest, and he could feel the weight of the night pressing in on him. Every second felt like an eternity. "This is it," the woman whispered. "No turning back now." The large man nodded, his face grim. "We do this quickly, quietly. Get the evidence, and get out." The man could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins, his body alive with a mixture of fear and anticipation. This was it, the moment they had been working toward. They would expose the truth, or they would die trying. They moved as one, slipping through the shadows like ghosts, their footsteps silent on the pavement. As they approached the building, the man felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He had come this far. He couldn't back down now. They reached the entrance without incident, and the woman took the lead, quickly picking the lock on the door. The man could feel his nerves stretching thin, every sense heightened. This was it. They were about to break into the heart of the enemy's lair. The door creaked open, and they slipped inside. Inside, the building was cold, sterile, and eerily quiet. The air smelled of dust and old paper, and the faint hum of machinery filled the silence. The woman led the way, her eyes scanning the darkened corridors, her movements swift and precise. The man followed closely behind, his mind racing with questions. What was this place? What had they been working on? And what was the final piece of the puzzle that would expose it all? They reached a small, secured office at the back of the building, and the woman quickly went to work on the computer terminal. The man stood guard, his eyes darting back and forth, watching for any signs of danger. The seconds seemed to drag on, each one feeling longer than the last. Then, a beep. The woman glanced up, her face lighting up with a look of triumph. Got it. The man stepped forward, leaning over her shoulder to see what she had found. On the screen was a list of names, high-ranking officials, powerful individuals, all linked to the project. But what caught his eye was the last name on the list. It was his own. His blood ran cold. The man's mind reeled. What does this mean? He was linked to this project in ways he couldn't understand. This wasn't just some random coincidence. He had been marked, chosen for something. But what? We've got everything we need, the woman said, her voice tense. Let's go. But as they turned to leave, a sound echoed down the hallway. A door slamming open. Footsteps. Fast. Too fast. They were coming. The man's heart leapt into his throat. Move. They ran, not daring to look back, their only goal now survival. The truth would come out, but first, they had to make it out alive.